Emma Carlson and her friend Leo Matthews had always been curious about hidden treasures online. Late one night, scrolling through Facebook Marketplace, they stumbled upon an antique dresser priced far too low to be real. The pictures looked perfect, but the listing felt wrong. Ignoring the warnings that crawled at the edge of their minds, Emma arranged to pick it up that very night. What they didn't know was that this dresser had been waiting for them, and once it was in their hands, it wouldn't let go. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't be. Drawers opened by themselves. Whispers echoed from the darkness, calling their names. And the moment Emma touched the locket inside, everything changed. By morning, the world they knew was gone. And what remained in that room wasn't human. I never thought buying something off Facebook Marketplace could feel like stepping into a trap. I had been scrolling late at night, my phone's light cutting through the darkness of my bedroom. I needed a dresser, something big, old, solid, and most of the listings were either overpriced or had people complaining in the comments about scratches and broken drawers. That's when I saw it. The post seemed almost too perfect. Dark wood, intricate carvings along the edges, handles that gleamed like tarnished silver in the photos. The price was absurdly low, but the pictures made it look like something that belonged in a museum rather than someone's home. I kept staring, almost hypnotized, as if it was calling to me. The seller's profile was bare, only a first name and a pixelated picture that could have been anyone. There were no reviews, no other posts, nothing. It felt wrong to trust someone like that. But my bedroom had felt incomplete for weeks, and this dresser seemed like the missing piece. Almost instinctively, I sent a message asking if it was still available. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. The reply was brief but insistent. Yes, can pick up tonight. Address in the message. I hesitated only a moment before convincing myself it was safe. I had picked up furniture from strangers before. Nothing had ever gone wrong. But there was a knot in my stomach that I couldn't shake, a whisper of unease that made me glance at the darkened street outside my window as I got ready. I ignored it, threw on some clothes, and grabbed my keys. Driving across town, I felt the city shrink around me. Streetlights flickered as I passed empty lots, the glow from my headlights bouncing off cracked pavement and abandoned houses. The address led me to a small, crumbling home at the end of a dead-end street. A single porch light flickered weakly, and in that dim glow, I could see the dresser sitting there. Its wood was darker than in the photos, almost black, and the carvings seemed deeper, more twisted. For a brief second, I swore the handles looked like tiny faces, distorted and staring, shifting as the shadows moved. My heart thumped harder, but I told myself it was just my imagination. I got out of the car, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The air smelled stale and damp, the kind of smell that makes you wrinkle your nose without thinking. The dresser was enormous, heavier than I expected. I struggled to lift it, my hands gripping the carved edges, but it seemed to almost resist me, the wood cool and slick as if it were alive. I managed to get it into the trunk, wiping sweat from my forehead. As I turned to glance at the house one last time, I froze. The front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. A dark shape lingered inside, half hidden in the shadows, motionless. My mind raced. Maybe the seller was just inside, watching to make sure I didn't take the dresser without paying. Maybe. But the figure didn't move, didn't breathe. And then the door closed slowly, deliberately, without a sound. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to move, slammed the trunk shut, and drove away as quickly as I dared. The drive home was quiet, the city now empty, the streetlights trailing like distant stars. I tried to focus on normal things, on the idea that I had just scored an amazing dresser at a bargain, but my mind kept drifting back to that dark shape in the doorway. Something about the way it had stood, unmoving, made my skin crawl. When I finally got home, I carried the dresser into my bedroom, each step heavier than the last. I placed it in the corner, facing the wall, trying to convince myself it was just a piece of furniture. I wiped it down, running my hand over the smooth, polished wood, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the bottom drawers was slightly open, even though I hadn't opened it. My fingers trembled as I reached toward it. Inside, pressed flat against the wood, was a faint handprint. It was small, delicate, almost childlike, and pale against the dark interior. It looked as though someone had been trapped there, pressing desperately against the surface to escape. I recoiled, my hand shaking, my heart hammering. I told myself it must have been left by the previous owner, maybe a kid who had played with the dresser. But the more I stared, the more it felt wrong. I stepped back, my breath uneven, and glanced at the shadows creeping along the edges of my room. In the dim light, the dresser seemed to loom larger than before, the carvings on the sides twisting subtly, forming grimacing faces I was sure weren't there before. For the first time that night, I questioned my decision. And then, in the quiet of my room, I thought I heard a faint scrape from the bottom drawer. I tried to convince myself that what I had seen in the dresser was nothing more than an old stain, a leftover mark from the previous owner's life. Maybe it was my imagination, I told myself, a trick of shadows in the dim light of my room. But no matter how many times I repeated it, a deep unease settled in my chest, pressing against my lungs. I couldn't stop thinking about the handprint, about the way it seemed almost alive, as though it had been left in a moment of panic. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the dresser in the corner. Every little noise in the house amplified, the wind brushing against the windows, the distant hum of a car engine, the creak of the floorboards as they shifted. Every sound made me flinch, every shadow felt like it was moving closer. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. At some point, I dozed fitfully, only to be jolted awake by a scraping sound, faint at first, but growing louder. My heart raced, my muscles tense as I listened. The sound was coming from the corner of the room, the dresser. The bottom drawer was sliding open, inch by inch, as if guided by some invisible hand. My rational mind screamed that it was the floorboards, or the uneven placement of the dresser, but my instincts told me otherwise. The movement was deliberate. I forced myself out of bed, each step toward the dresser heavy and trembling. I stopped in front of it, staring into the dark interior of the open drawer. The wood inside looked deeper, almost black, and I could see faint scratches etched into it. They weren't there when I had examined it earlier. Deep grooves, long and jagged, crisscrossed the surface as if something had been clawing its way out. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, to get out of the room, but something compelled me to stay. The scratches were fresh, sharp, and unmistakably intentional. I tried to shut the drawer, but it resisted, as if it had its own weight, its own will. My fingers slipped against the slick wood, and the drawer creaked slowly, deliberately, until it finally gave way. I forced it closed, my chest heaving, sweat prickling along my spine. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was a combination of stress, exhaustion, and my imagination. I told myself countless lies to keep my mind from spiraling, but deep down I knew the truth. This dresser was not ordinary. That night, I slept with the light on, but even illuminated, the dresser seemed to absorb the light around it, casting dark, writhing shadows along the walls. Every time I glanced at it, I felt my stomach churn. My reflection in the polished surface looked wrong, distorted, as if the shadows behind me were moving independently. I told myself to close my eyes, to ignore it, but I couldn't. I was drawn to it, mesmerized by the unnatural presence in the corner of the room. Hours later I woke again. The air was colder than before, biting against my skin, and the room smelled faintly of something wet and metallic, like rusted iron. I shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around me. The drawers were moving again. Not slowly this time, but jerking open and closed, as if testing me, mocking me. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I felt a presence, something hovering just beyond the edge of my vision. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen. Then I saw it. A shadow slipped from the bottom drawer. It was small, fragile and pale, like the handprint I had seen earlier, but now it had form. It lingered at the edge of the drawer, stretching into the darkness, reaching for me. My throat went dry. My mind screamed to move, to flee, but my feet wouldn't obey. The shadow paused, almost studying me, before retreating back into the drawer. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in bed, staring at the dresser, my thoughts spinning in a haze of fear and disbelief. I kept imagining what could have left the handprint, the scratches, the strange cold touch I had felt before. My rational mind couldn't accept it, but my gut told me the truth. Something was trapped in that drawer, and somehow, it was aware of me. By morning, I felt hollow, drained, like I had aged years in a few hours. I told myself I would call the seller, confront them, demand answers. But when I reached for my phone, I noticed the locket I hadn't seen before. It sat atop the dresser, silver and gleaming, almost beckoning. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even noticed it when I went to bed. And now, staring down at it, I realized the most horrifying thing. The photograph inside was of a little girl. Her eyes were empty, black, and her mouth twisted in a grotesque smile, the kind that didn't belong in this world. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, my hands trembling. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, as though the darkness around the dresser was expanding, pressing against me. And then, I heard the faintest whisper, a breathy sigh, coming from the drawer. It was so soft I thought I imagined it. But when I glanced at the bottom drawer, it was wide open again, and in the darkness inside, I swore I saw something move. I tried to convince myself that what I had seen in the dresser was a trick of the shadows, a product of exhaustion and fear. I didn't sleep that night, pacing my room, the locket clutched in my hand. The little girl's eyes seemed to follow me wherever I moved, her twisted smile haunting my vision. I told myself I would just lock the dresser, leave the locket on top, and try to ignore it. But deep down, I knew that ignoring it wasn't an option. By the morning, the light didn't help. The room felt oppressive, the air thick and stagnant, like I was breathing underwater. The bottom drawer, which I had carefully shut and locked the night before, was open again. My stomach turned. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near the dresser since I had placed the locket on top. Yet there it was, wide open, revealing only darkness inside. Darkness so deep it seemed impossible for a piece of furniture made of wood. I leaned closer, drawn by some sick curiosity, and that's when I saw it. The locket, the one I had left on top of the dresser, had moved. It wasn't just lying there anymore. It was inside the drawer, placed neatly in the center as if someone or something had returned it. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My hands trembled as I reached for it, but something made me hesitate. I had the terrifying sense that touching it would invite something I couldn't even name. With shaking hands, I opened the locket. The photograph inside had changed. The little girl was no longer alone. Standing behind her was a tall, shadowy figure, blurred and indistinct, but I knew instinctively that it was meant to be me. My heart stuttered, my throat went dry. I stared at the picture, feeling my stomach twist. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface of the dresser. But it wasn't just a reflection anymore, it seemed alive. Its eyes wider than mine, its mouth curving into a smile I hadn't made. I dropped the locket in horror. It landed on the floor with a soft clink, and the bottom drawer slammed shut by itself. I jumped back, my ears ringing, my pulse hammering in my temples. I didn't want to believe what was happening. Surely it was impossible. Yet the scratches inside the drawer, deeper now, seemed fresh, more desperate. My fingers traced the jagged lines, and a faint warmth ran through them, like the scratches had been left by living hands, hands that were trying to reach me even now. Fear gnawed at me, relentless and insistent. I tried to push the dresser against the wall, to keep it from moving, but it felt heavier than before, as if it had grown in weight, grown in some unnatural way. I pushed with all my strength, sweat running down my face, but it refused to budge. And as I struggled, I realized that the air around me was different, heavier, vibrating with some presence that I could neither see nor name. By evening, I was barely functioning. I couldn't leave the room, couldn't look away from the dresser. Every creak of the house, every faint rustle felt like it was coming from the drawers themselves. I tried to distract myself, tried to scroll my phone, but the screen went black, flickering once, then showing a single notification, a message from Facebook Marketplace. The seller's profile, which had disappeared before, was back online. The message read, "You found her." I dropped my phone. My hand shook uncontrollably, and the dresser seemed to loom over me, the wood darker, the carvings twisting like living things. The bottom drawer opened slowly, deliberately, and inside, I found a second locket. It was identical to the first. My hands froze as I picked it up. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. Inside was the little girl again, but this time her eyes were not empty. They were fixed on me, burning with a terrible, accusing intensity. Behind her, the shadowy figure was taller now, clearer, unmistakably me, but something was wrong. The figure's head tilted at an impossible angle, its expression grotesque, a mirror of my own face but twisted into a grin that I had never made. I stumbled back, tripping over the carpet, my mind screaming for me to run, to escape, but I couldn't. The dresser seemed to have rooted itself to the floor, and the darkness inside it seemed to expand, reaching toward me, pulling at the edges of my vision, whispering my name in a voice that was mine but not mine. I didn't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear. When I finally dared to move, I glanced at the top drawer. It had been closed, neat, normal. But now, etched into the wood, were words scratched so deep they looked like they bled. "She sees you." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my body trembling. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, suffocating. I wanted to destroy the dresser, to throw it out, but some part of me knew that wouldn't work. Something told me that whatever had been trapped inside it before was awake now, and it had been waiting for me all along. And as I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the bottom drawer. I realized the most terrifying thought. The little girl wasn't the only one trapped in the dresser anymore. By the time night fell, I had stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. I didn't sleep, didn't leave my room, barely ate. Every instinct screamed at me to get rid of the dresser, but every attempt I had made to move it had failed. It was heavier, somehow, than it should be. It seemed to resist me, rooted to the floor like a tree, immovable, almost alive. I tried covering it with a sheet, hoping that hiding it would lessen its presence, but the darkness beneath the cloth seemed to thrum, pulsating, as if aware of my attempts to ignore it. The air in the room had grown colder over the past few nights, a bone-deep chill that no heater could touch. My skin felt clammy, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, darker than the rest of the space, crawling closer each time I glanced at the dresser. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the heater, even the faint wind outside felt amplified, distorted, like the room itself had been twisted by some unseen hand. I tried to stay awake, pacing in small circles, but exhaustion eventually overcame me. I collapsed onto my bed, my eyes locked on the dresser, praying for sleep to give me even a brief reprieve. That's when I noticed it had moved. Not far, just a few inches from the wall, but enough that I could see the outline of the floor where it had been. I hadn't touched it, I hadn't moved anything, and yet there it was, closer, more imposing. I sat up, my pulse hammering, and stared. The bottom drawer was open. The locket had returned, resting neatly in the center. My hands shook as I picked it up. I didn't want to open it again, but some twisted part of me couldn't stop myself. I lifted the lid, and this time the image inside made me recoil in horror. The little girl was still there, but she had changed. Her head tilted unnaturally to the side, and her mouth was stretched wide, almost impossibly, into a grin that exposed too many teeth. Behind her, the figure that looked like me was standing taller, its face twisted, eyes hollow, smiling in a way that no human could. I dropped the locket and scrambled backward, bumping into my nightstand. The sound of the impact echoed in the room, but it was the sound that followed that made me freeze. A faint scratching came from the bottom drawer, rhythmic, deliberate, growing louder. It wasn't random. It was communicating, tapping out some terrible message. My ears strained to make sense of it, but all I could hear was the insistence, the pleading, the warning that seemed to come from something trapped just out of sight. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to leave the room, but the doorknob was frozen in my hand. It wouldn't turn. I shook it, heart racing, realizing that the dresser's influence had spread beyond its own frame. The air felt heavier, pressing against me, and then I heard it, a faint whisper, soft but clear, coming from the bottom drawer. "Don't leave. Don't leave me." I staggered backward, my mind reeling. The drawers began to slam open and shut violently, louder and louder, until the entire room shook with the force of it. The floorboards groaned under the weight, my walls rattled, and the shadows around the dresser seemed to pulse in time with the noise. I could feel something moving inside, something pressing against the wood from within, desperate to escape. I realized then that the locket hadn't been a warning, it had been bait. The little girl wasn't alone in the drawer. Whatever had been trapped with her had grown stronger, fed by my fear, by my presence in the room. The shadows behind me shifted, coalescing into shapes that were familiar but not human hands. Faces, eyes, all twisted, watching, waiting. I backed into the corner, trying to keep my distance, but the dresser's influence filled the room. I could see my own reflection in the polished wood, but it wasn't just reflecting me anymore. My reflection moved independently, its eyes wide and unblinking, its mouth curved into a grin I had never made. It raised a hand when I didn't, beckoning me closer. I realized then, with a horror that turned my stomach to ice, that the dresser had been patient all along. It had been waiting, learning, feeding. Every night, every moment of fear, had strengthened it, and now it was ready. Whatever was inside the bottom drawer wasn't just a child anymore. It was waiting for me, learning me, becoming me. I wanted to leave, but the dresser seemed to stretch across the room, filling the space with its presence, suffocating me. I could feel something press against my back, cold and heavy, as if invisible hands were holding me in place. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. The drawers stopped moving, the shadows froze, the room fell into an unnatural stillness. I stood there, trembling, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But when I glanced at the bottom drawer, I froze in terror. Inside, instead of the locket, was a small note, scratched into the wood in letters that seemed to burn into my vision. "She.S. waiting. And now, so are you." By the time I reached the 5th night, I had stopped pretending I could control the situation. I didn't leave my room, didn't eat, didn't answer the phone. Even the daylight felt wrong, casting long, stretched shadows across my floor that didn't belong to anything in the room. I had considered burning the dresser, smashing it with a hammer, anything to destroy it, but the thought made my skin crawl. Every instinct screamed that violence wouldn't work, that it would only make things worse. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at it. The polished wood reflected the dim light, gleaming like a black mirror. The drawers were closed, but I knew better. I had learned to read the subtle signs, the faint scratches on the floor, the shifting shadows, the cold drafts that always seemed to come from its corner. It was waiting for me. I was convinced of it. Suddenly, the bottom drawer opened on its own, slowly, deliberately, as if it were breathing. My hands froze in midair, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it would burst. Inside, the locket was back, gleaming under the weak light. I picked it up, knowing I shouldn't, but unable to resist. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, the photograph had changed again. The little girl was gone. Instead, there was a photograph of me sitting on the edge of my bed exactly as I was now. The image was perfect, every detail identical, and behind me, in the corner of the room reflected in the photo, was the dresser itself, but it wasn't stationary. It was taller, wider, looming over me, and from its drawers, shadowy shapes pressed outward, reaching, grasping, stretching toward me. I dropped the locket, and it landed with a metallic clink, bouncing slightly across the floor. The bottom drawer slammed shut with a deafening crash, and the room went unnaturally silent. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, but the silence was suffocating, heavy, pressing against my ears. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, deliberate, coming from inside the dresser. "Come closer. It's time." I shook my head, backing up. My reflection in the polished surface shifted independently, the face that stared back at me no longer matching my own. Its eyes were wide, dark, and unblinking. Its mouth curved into the same grotesque grin I had seen in the locket, and it raised a hand, beckoning me forward. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were cemented to the floor. The drawer began to slide open again, slowly, the scraping sound echoing through the room. From inside I could see faint shapes moving too many to count, writhing, pressing against each other, reaching for me. I realized, with a gut-wrenching horror, that all the things I had ignored, all the handprints, scratches, and locket images, had been warnings. They weren't trapped objects, they were alive in some terrible way, waiting to take me to. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. The air felt cold enough to burn, the shadows stretching impossibly long, moving in ways that defied physics. I realized that the dresser was no longer confined to its corner, it was in the room, and it was everywhere. My reflection blinked when I didn't, and suddenly it moved independently, stepping out of the mirror, merging with the shadows that crawled along the walls. I knew I had no escape. The door was frozen, the windows darkened, the walls seemed to bend inward. The last shred of reason left me as I crawled toward the dresser, and when I looked into the bottom drawer one final time, I saw it, an endless void blacker than anything I had ever seen, stretching into nothing. Shapes swirled within it, forming faces, hands, mouths, and eyes. The void pulsed, alive, and a voice whispered from inside, clear as day, "We've been waiting for you." I screamed, but no sound came out. The darkness reached for me, cold and heavy, pressing into my skin, seeping into my mind. My reflection grinned one last time before the surface rippled, and I felt a pull I couldn't resist. I was drawn forward, into the drawer, into the darkness, into the unknown. Hours, maybe days later, the dresser sat in my room, silent and still. The drawers were closed, polished, almost serene. The locket lay on top, now empty. My bed was neatly made, as if no one had been here at all, and on the floor, scratched into the wood, was one final message, faint and almost imperceptible. "She's not yours anymore. But soon, someone else will find us." No one ever saw me again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the Facebook Marketplace listing. The dresser is probably still waiting somewhere, for the next person desperate enough to answer its call.